The New Orleans Saints quarterback competition is the cornerstone of their offseason so far, and it's time to make the case for Jake Haener. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode, we're continuing our what we're looking for at OTAs conversation, jumping over to the defensive side. We'll take a look at the intrigue in the secondary because of two rookies that could shake things up. Why the New Orleans Saints need to show some fire over on the defensive side because it's been missing over the course of the past few years, especially from one area in particular. I'll tell you where. But to kick everything off today, a bit of a surprise topic for us. I want to take a moment to make the case for Jake Haener in the ongoing New Orleans Saints starting quarterback competition. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen and being it every day. You're here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Yes, I am here to make the case for third-year quarterback Jake Haener in the midst of the quarterback competition for the New Orleans Saints. Let me explain why I've decided to do this. It's because every time that I have had a conversation about the New Orleans Saints starting quarterback competition, I have effectively either left Jake Haener out of the conversation or written Jake Haener off in the conversation. And to be honest, that's just unfair. We have seen from New Orleans Saints head coach Kellen Moore and heard from him that all three of those quarterbacks will very much be in competition for the starting quarterback role and in contention for the starting quarterback role for the 2025 season for the New Orleans Saints. And while it feels like that job belongs to either Tyler Shough or Spencer Rattler before things are all said and done, there is an unfair nature within me that has continuously had me just leave Jake Haener out of the conversation. So I thought I would push against that. And for today, make the case in favor of Jake Haener. What are the things that make Jake Haener a quality quarterback? And why might he be able to stand out from the rest of the pack amongst the four quarterbacks that are in that, at least in that quarterback room, the three quarterbacks that we expect to be in conversation for the starting quarterback role? So I want to start off with Jake Haener's supreme confidence. It could be the very thing that makes me entirely wrong about my lack of consideration about him in the starting quarterback conversation. Time and time and time again, every time that you see Jake Haener on a practice field, whether it is just him throwing one-on-one, whether it's him throwing with trainers, whether he's throwing routes on air, or whether it's in full team drills, preseason, regular season, anytime that you have seen him, the one thing you can never say that Jake Haener lacks is confidence, because he simply does not lack that confidence. And I do think that is an important trait of a quarterback. We've spoken so much about how this quarterback competition is going to be separated by the mental side of the game, in and out of the operation, all those other things, being able to make checks at the line of scrimmage, being poised at the line of scrimmage. Well, if you don't have any confidence, none of that works. Without confidence, you can't call plays in the huddle, or at least you can, but no one's going to listen to you. Without confidence, you're not going to make the right checks at the line of scrimmage because you're going to be hesitating. Without confidence, you're not going to throw the ball to the right places. You're not going to make the right reads because you lack the confidence and you're hesitating. Jake Haener, none of that is an issue for him. He is supremely confident. So I put that at number one. As a part of that also comes an unshakable resolve around him. There is nothing that he doesn't believe that he can do. And while that might sound more like arrogance than confidence, it's not about that. It's a resolve that I will make the right decision. If you go into any huddle, into any play call, line up for any play, go into any practice, go into any game, go into any film session, any classroom session, thinking that you're going to do the wrong thing, you're definitely not going to do the right thing because of it. That is something that Jake Haener does not have an issue with from anything that I've seen with him. He has unshakable resolve. And with that comes a short memory. You can make a mistake and then come back and then end up being able to make a big play. We saw that during the game that he started last season. A couple of passes that didn't necessarily go his way, wasn't even necessarily his fault. You had some situations with passes dropped, or you had situations with the ball being tipped, or whatever it might be, a penalty bringing something back, and he would go right back out there and try to make an even bigger play the next time. Short memory, just as important as it is for cornerbacks, it's as important for the guys that are throwing the football too when it comes to the quarterbacks. And he has a little bit of an uncelebrated athleticism about him as well. He can move, he can get outside the pocket, extend plays. He's not somebody that's going to go out there and be a Lamar Jackson for you or a Josh Allen for you and be a legitimate run threat with his legs like a Jaden Daniels, but he does have sort of the Bo Nix, Baker Mayfield about him, where he's able to, the CJ Stroud about him, where he's able to get outside of the pocket, extend plays, keep the ball in his hands, keep his eyes up, and look for the opportunity to go out there and get the ball somewhere as plays break down, making cornerbacks cover twice, all these other things, right? Remember that a lot of these times when it comes to these big plays that happen outside of structure and outside of rhythm, it happens because the corners are having to cover a second route, right? The wide receiver runs their route, or the tight end or running back runs their route. They get to the end of what that route is supposed to be. They turn around, they look, they try to see where their quarterback is scrambling, get to the same side of the field as the quarterback. The corner or the defensive back or the coverage player is now forced to cover a second route that is typically running straight across the field, which is very challenging. Jake Haener can create those opportunities because he does have a good assessment of his ability in his athleticism to be able to extend some plays, get outside the pocket, and look for additional opportunities. While he only completed 46.2% of his passes last season in 2024 in his lone start, but also in the games that he played, he did appear in multiple games. He did complete 72% of his passes in his final year in 2022 at Fresno State and finished his career with a 68.2% completion percentage. I highlight that because the last thing that I want to highlight in terms of strengths for him has always been great ball placement. He's always done a very good job putting the ball where it needs to be, particularly in practices. I don't know that we've necessarily seen that translate to the game. It would help if he wasn't running for his life in the opportunities that he's gotten before, but he has really, really good ball placement. And so that's something that we've always seen from him, something we've always kind of watched in practices, things like that, always finding the right location for the football. That's a big part of the mental side of his game, much like that confidence, much like his ability to get in and out of the operation, all those other things. He has the brain, he has the mind to be able to get the ball where it needs to go, choose the right angle on his throws, and also choose a different velocity on his throws. He's not a gun it in all the time type player. He knows when to use touch and all these other things. Through 68 touchdowns to just 18 interceptions over the course of his collegiate career. That's well above the 2-to-1 ratio you like to see for young quarterbacks, things like that. And so for all of those reasons, I chastise myself for consistently pushing him aside in the conversation. Do I ultimately think that Jake Haener wins the quarterback scenario or wins the quarterback job? No, I don't ultimately think that he wins the starting role. I'm not doing this so that later on I can come back to this if he happens to win and say, well, see, I told you he might be able to. Listen, if he wins the quarterback competition, I am still wrong about him, right? Because I'm still saying I don't think that he wins the quarterback competition. But I am saying that there is reason to give him his space that he deserves in this conversation. And I should be doing a better job of that. So I wanted to take myself to task on it when it comes down to it. Some of the things that you want to work on with him, obviously, like that athleticism is really good, but it feels sometimes like he feels pressure before it's really there. So I think that that's one of those big things. And then sometimes that confidence can get in the way a little bit too. So you got to make sure that it becomes more of a weapon than it becomes a hindrance in different situations. But I wanted to make sure that I elevated some conversation around Jake Haener because I have so often been sort of devolving the conversation around him, which isn't necessarily the treatment that anybody deserves. And so Kellen Moore says he's part of the conversation. Let's make him a part of the conversation. Ultimately, I'd still be wrong if he won the job. I'm not doing this to protect myself. I'm doing this because I think it's fair. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints get on the practice field later on today, taking a classroom to the field, as head coach Kellen Moore says. And I want to take a look as they get started with OTAs and we get to be there at what it is that I'm going to be looking for on the defensive side and why fire from one specific place is a must on that OTA field. Let's get to that next. We continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. If you're a small business owner, you ain't got the time to be working 24 hours a day trying to hire and build your team. but you know that building your team is such a big part of the success of your small business. Your small business is only as good as the people that you hire to help you manage it. So that's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. LinkedIn Jobs makes it easy to post your job for free, share it for your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. The Post Your Job feature, one of the new features that they have, will help you write job descriptions and make sure that you can quickly get your job in front of the right people and the right candidates for your hires. That's why 72% of small business owners say that LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. I've gotten jobs through LinkedIn. You can find the right people. Post your job today at linkedin.com/LockedInNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedInNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, family, if the New Orleans Saints want to win anybody over, it's going to come down to the coaching staff setting the tone today as media is present for OTAs. I want to see some fire from this New Orleans Saints coaching staff. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. I don't think that necessarily means that Kellen Moore has to get outside of his characteristic, running around, yelling and screaming at everybody and all those other things. But think about some of the personalities that this New Orleans Saints team now has on its coaching staff. Keith Williams, right? Coach Dub, vocal, energetic, fun, funny, takes you to task, holds you accountable. Look at Bo Davis on the defensive side, a home run hire for this New Orleans Saints defensive coaching staff, the new defensive line coach, who's kind of focused on everybody that lines up over the tackles to the inside. Everybody that lines up outside the tackles to outside the tight ends. That's Jay Rodgers and the edges coach. He's going to be focused on those guys, Cam Jordan, Carl Granderson, Isaiah Foskey, Fadil Diggs, so on and so forth. But those guys that line up over the tackle down to the center, Colin Saunders, Bryan Bresee, Nathan Shepard, Christian Boyd, Jonah Williams, so on and so forth. Those guys are going to be in Bo Davis's room. Bo Davis, big voice, demanding coach, funny dude as well, great rapport with the players, all that. These guys, along with guys like Peter Sermon and others on that defensive coaching staff, Brandon Staley has an intensity that's undeniable. You look at some of these younger coaches on the offensive side, but with Chase Haslett and stuff like that, working with the tight ends. But you get to Doug Nussmeier, Joel Thomas, these guys that are going to be helping to set the tone on the offensive side. Phil Galliano on the special team side, always one of the loudest people on the field at any time. There were times during practices over the course of the last few seasons that, with the exception of Darren Rizzi, Phil Galliano, and Coach Dub, Keith Williams, that the people that you heard the most were the players in practices, not the coaches, not the fiery head coach, none of that. It was Foster Morrow and Colin Saunders and Demario Davis and Cam Jordan. Those are the names that the voices that you mostly heard all throughout practice. I want to hear the coaches getting hype, getting ecstatic, all those other stuff. Let me give Michael Hodges, former linebackers coach, his flowers. He was a great voice too. But I want to see more of that fire from this New Orleans Saints coaching staff. This coaching staff is going to be tasked to set the tone. If they can set the tone, the players will respond. It's time to bring energy back to this team, to this organization. And I'm going to be looking at the coaching staff and their opportunity to be able to do that, as they're the ones to show the fire. They're the ones to set the tone. That's what I want to see as we get started, especially in the defensive side of the football in OTAs. Next thing that I really want to see that continues around that coaching staff side of it all, but really is only because of the players that it incorporates, is what's the front seven really look like? Now that you have some of the veteran players, where does Cam Jordan line up, who's been working with the edge rushers, not the defensive linemen, right? He's been working with Carl Granderson. He's working in Jay Rodgers' room, all that. So you're looking at who are the guys that are going to be those kind of stand-up edge rushers that are lining up outside the tackle to outside the tight end spot, which might be the more stand-up spot. Outside the tackle, you can still put your hand in the dirt and even fronts and stuff like that. So it's not always going to be stand-up, but those guys that are going to be those edge rushers that are trying to win with athleticism, win with speed, win with bend. That big change for the New Orleans Saints defensive line coaching approach after a couple of failed years under Todd Grantham is significant, right? Simplifying and focusing the conversation, the language of the defense, the roles, the communication to those that are edge rushers independent of those that are defensive linemen, I think is a super smart way to go about building out your coaching staff structure. So kudos to Brandon Staley for doing that. Kudos to Kellen Moore for seeing the value in that. So now, where do those players also line up? Who are the defensive linemen versus the edge rushers? Who are the inside linebackers versus the outside linebackers when that comparison becomes relevant? I'm super, super interested now that Pete Werner's in the building, Cam Jordan's in the building, Carl Granderson's in the building, Colin Saunders is in the building, Bryan Bresee's in the building. Now that you have all those players around, who are those that line up on the inside? Who are those that line up on the edge? And who are those that line up at inside linebacker? And on top of all of that too, or in addition to all of that, where does Danny Stutzman fit in? Because I don't imagine that Demario Davis will be around for OTAs. If I recall correctly, and forgive me, I'm trying to remember my notes from a year ago at this point. But if I remember correctly, he typically does his own thing during OTAs, much like Alvin Kamara. Not an issue, no problem. OTAs are voluntary, no need to be there. And so if he's not there, is it Pete Werner that takes that lead role and then Danny Stutzman steps into Pete Werner's role, which is kind of what you're hoping maybe the future of this linebacker core looks like? Or does somebody else step in? Does Danny Stutzman step into Demario Davis's role? It's going to be very interesting sort of to see where the inside linebackers line up, what their roles and responsibilities look like, what kind of work they're getting, all of those things. So that front seven is going to be of major, major intrigue. Where is Isaiah Foskey getting mixed in? I mean, he's going to be a stand-up rusher or he's going to be an edge rusher, but is he a second-team guy? Is somebody else surprisingly already above him? Like, those are going to be the other things that you're looking at too, is kind of the order in which these players are deployed, even though what we see in OTAs might not necessarily make it to the season. So we do have to keep that in mind as well. But this will at least give us the starting place for where things are beginning. Kind of like when we talked about the offensive line yesterday, like, hey, we'll probably see a few different things, but whatever we see doesn't necessarily tell us or guarantee us what we'll see at the beginning or even at the end of training camp. Like, those things might change based upon what's learned over the course of time. And then going back to the edge rushers, specifically what the assignments look like. So there's this prevailing thought that when you're in a 3-4, so you have 3 down linemen who are kind of the run stoppers lined up inside the tackles or at best over the tackles towards the center. You got the nose tackle that's nose to nose with the center, and you have the 2 other down linemen that are on the outside of that player, on either side of that player. You have the 2 inside linebackers, backfield of that are covering that middle of the field. And then you have these other 2 players, outside linebackers or edge rushers, whatever it is that you want to call them. There's this prevailing belief that it's just going to be Carl Granderson and Chase Young that are standing up on the edge. But here's the thing. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes and oftentimes, one of those outside linebackers is asked to not just be a pass rushing threat, but be a threat to also drop into coverage as well. So that way you're effectively, instead of consistently planning a 5-man rush, you're still planning a 4-man rush. Your 3 down linemen and that 1 stand-up edge rusher that will be the rusher. So is it just that 1 that's coming on the pass rush, or is both of them coming and that turns it into a blitz, or does one of them back off into coverage? And so who's that player that's the hybrid pass rusher versus ability to drop back? Is that a place where Danny Stutzman potentially fills? Is that a role that maybe a guy like Tyreen Powell out of Rutgers, the undrafted free agent that has this extensive, wild, long reach, maybe that's a role that he can serve? That's going to be another one of those big things that I'm going to be watching for over the course of these OTA practices starting today as well. What are the actual roles and responsibilities of the guys that are asked to stand up? Because it's not just as simple as just stand up, you're a pass rusher. Sometimes you got to be able to drop back into coverage. So who's the hybrid player versus who's the full-time pass rusher? All right, coming up next, now that we talked about the front 7, let's go to the secondary, because I think there's a ton of intrigue in the secondary, including a major, major injury update that we still need. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The front 7 on the defensive side, of course, has a ton of intrigue, but so too do the defensive backs and the secondary. The first thing that I want to start off with here is a major injury update that we're hoping to get a little bit more information on and ideally to see some progress with, and that is this year's draft pick, Quincy Riley, the cornerback who had a procedure, small, sounds minor, doesn't sound like it's that big of a deal, not connected to the ankle injury that kept him out of 2 games early in the 2024 season. He came back from that injury, played throughout the rest of the season, did the pre-draft process, participated in the Senior Bowl, so on and so forth. So this was a different thing. There was a small procedure done. He was not participating, but he was around. He was walking around. He was in Jersey, all this other stuff. In a Jersey. He wasn't in New Jersey. He was in a Jersey. Wherever the cornerbacks were, he was. All that kind of stuff all throughout rookie minicamp. Is he now participating, or has he been able to progress to participating in the time between rookie minicamp and OTAs? And so we'll get our first glimpse of that on Thursday. The Saints did put out a video on the first day of OTAs on Tuesday. And in that video, there was one point where you could see Quincy Riley, the back of his jersey, walking with other DBs and other players. It looked like maybe they were coming out of a special teams thing or something like that. Maybe not. I don't know. It was OTAs. Who knows? And so they were all walking away. And from what I could tell, he looked like he was in cleats. So maybe, just maybe, there's a bit of a step forward here for him. We will find out, though. That will be a big part of the update that we'll get today. If he's out there and participating in that number 29 jersey, which is the jersey number that he's wearing, Paulson Adebo's former number, then that's great news because he could be a guy that starts week 1 for all we know. If he's not necessarily bad news, but not good news yet. We'll see how things progress there. But really looking forward to getting some kind of update on Quincy Riley's injury or recovery, I think is probably more appropriate to say. Now, if he's on the field, it's going to be very interesting to see what the assignments are. Where is Alontae Taylor? Where is Kool-Aid McKinstry? Do we see nickel sets to where we get to see who the slot corner is and all these other things? I'm going to be very interested to see all of that. The other player that I'm really intrigued, that I have a lot of intrigue in, rather, in terms of seeing where they're deployed, how they're utilized, all those other things, is Jonas Sanker. I keep wanting to do that constantly. I keep wanting to say Bishop Sankey. I remember Bishop Sankey. I did it on the squad show not too long ago too. Which, by the way, banger of a squad show this morning. Make sure you go and check that out. I'm very interested to see where it is that Jonas Sanker contributes on this defense in 2025. I think he's good enough. Let me say that a little bit differently because I feel more strongly about it than that. I think that he is so good that he can contribute his rookie season. He doesn't have to be a starter his rookie season, but he absolutely has the talent to contribute right away, especially in an attacking and aggressive defense like Brandon Staley's. There's a role for a player of his ilk, of his play style. And so where is he utilized? Is he a nickel option? Is he a strong safety option, just a box safety option that plays down close to the line of scrimmage? Can they get him work away from the line of scrimmage? Do they use him as like a dime or a nickel linebacker? Like, does he challenge a guy like Jordan Howden for his role as a dime back? Like, there's so many of those little nuanced positions and those sub packages that a Jonas Sanker could potentially walk right in and take. And so I'm really, really intrigued to see, now that we'll actually get a look at like the familiar defensive personnel that we're used to seeing, really intrigued to see where he, Justin Reed, Tyrann Mathieu all kind of fit with one another, or where he slots in behind one of those guys. Like, is he the Tyrann Mathieu close to the line of scrimmage player, or do they adjust Tyrann Mathieu's role to have him further away from the line of scrimmage and then bring Justin Reed down closer to the line? And then is that the role that Sanker serves? Like, there's a lot of those things in terms of how those chess pieces could potentially move on the chessboard in Brandon Staley's chess game of a defense, if you feel me. And so I'm really, really interested to see where a guy like Jonas Sanker ends up fitting as well. Okay, finally with the secondary, going back to coaching for a second, which again, I think so important, sets the tone here throughout these OTAs, especially with the veterans there. Just physically more bodies around, more bodies to command and move and coach and all those other things. So you having to use that voice, I think, is a good thing. Terry Joseph, who is the Saints defensive pass game coordinator, as well as Grady Brown, who is the Saints cornerbacks coach or secondary or defensive backs coach. Very intrigued to see how they kind of split things up, where Terry Joseph is involved, how Coach Grady Brown is involved. All of those pieces. I'm very, very interested to see what the division of labor is there. because unlike the defensive line and edges coach delineation, there's not as clear a delineation when it comes to the secondary coaching staff, the defensive backs coaching staff. You have Terry Joseph as the defensive pass game coordinator. And then on top of that, you've got Grady Brown, who's listed as the cornerbacks coach. But then you have an assistant defensive backs coach in Robert Blanton. And Robert Blanton is a former safety himself. And so is Blanton working with the safeties while Brown is working with the corners, and Joseph is just kind of working with Staley and then maybe like looking over all things pass game. How does that necessarily all fall into place? Really, really intrigued, because I think that, again, just like with the edge rushers coach, as well as the defensive line coach, being able to focus that communication, focus the coaching, focus the communication, focus the, process, the scheme, the system to one individual position. I think that makes sense for safety and cornerback as well. And it is so intriguing to me that Grady Brown is not listed as a defensive backs coach. He's listed as a cornerbacks coach, while Robert Blanton is listed as an assistant defensive backs coach when there's no defensive backs coach. So it's just, I don't know, it's just interesting choice of language in all that. And maybe I'm reading too much into dumb stuff. But I mean, like when you look at Jay Rogers, edges coach, you look at Bo Davis, defensive line coach, then you look at Brian Young, assistant defensive line coach, right? So I'm very, very intrigued to see how this works. Like the other version of this is that you have like Jay Rogers as the edges coach, Bo Davis as the run game, the defensive run game coordinator, and then Brian Young is the assistant defensive line coach with no defensive line coach. And so like that's kind of what this feels like right now. And so I'm really, really intrigued to see how this all, folds into one another and everything like that. So for me, that's really, really intriguing as well. So what's the progress on Quincy Riley? Where does he line up? Where does Alontae Taylor line up? Where does Kool-Aid McKinstry line up? Where do the safeties line up? And how are these coaches splitting up communication? And how effective is all of it? All of that is stuff that we'll finally get an opportunity to see. I hope you can feel my excitement around the fact that OTAs are here, because it's just kind of that next step. I mean, no decisions are going to be made out of OTAs. You're going to have a punter competition. You're going to potentially have a kicker competition again. Like there's a bunch of this kind of stuff that goes on all around the quarterback competition. And on the defensive side, you'll have competitions and people vying for their roles. And the offensive line, you're going to have people vying for their roles. No decisions are going to be made during 10 practices of OTAs. But this is our first glance at where it all starts, so that we all will figure out later on how it all ends. So I'm really excited about that. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, everything you need to know from OTAs, and we'll roll along through the weekend as well. We'll start off with the quarterbacks, work our way through the roster, figure out everything that's going on. Great stuff I'm sure we'll get from Kellen Moore. I'm speaking with somebody that I'm very excited to as well in the coaching staff on later on today. So we'll have a whole bunch for you over the course of the weekend. Make sure that you're here to catch it all on Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know what the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.